The case of the man from Taured has been debunked, and now it's just an urban legend, and it's based on the antics of a man named John Zegrus. But if that's true, then why is the information in the urban legend so different than the investigation? And what in the world is the lead detective on that case doing in the JFK investigation? Everyone likes a good urban legend. Have you ever heard of the tale of the green man with no face? Well, he's said to have wandered aimlessly through the streets at night, and if you were in just the right place at just the right time, you'd see him.
The legend goes that he roams a certain hollow late at night and chases the parkers and the loafers.
Then there's the story of the woman who desperately called for help, claiming that someone was trying to break into her house through the bathroom mirror. The story has it she called the police more than once, but they thought she was crazy. Then the neighbors heard her screaming, and they called 911, but still no one came. Then, 2 days later, she was found dead in her home in a pool of her own blood. Well, the most interesting thing about these two stories is, while they were first believed to be just urban legends, both of them turned out to be true. The story of the green man with no face was actually a person named Raymond Robinson. When he was just 8 years old, he climbed an electrical pole and he reached for a bird's nest, when suddenly he was hit with 11,000 volts of electricity and then he was sent flying. The incident severely burned his face and his arms, leaving only holes where his eyes and nose once were. Well, he recovered, and then years later, not wanting to experience the gawking and perhaps the ridicule from others, he'd only come out at night. And the woman who desperately called for help because someone was trying to break into her home through her bathroom mirror? Well, that was a lady named Ruthie Mae McCoy. On the night of April 22nd, 1987, she called 911 right around 8:45 in the evening. But because her claim was so outlandish and because she had a history of schizophrenia, her call wasn't taken seriously. But did her killers really come through the bathroom mirror? Well, turns out that they did. The particular set of apartments that she lived in was built in such a way so that the bathrooms from adjacent units were back to back. That way, water pipes could run in between the apartments. And the spaces where the water pipes ran through were built wide enough to allow plumbers to squeeze in and work on pipes if need be. Eventually, burglars learned about this, and the story is true. Incidentally, this case is one of the ones that inspired the horror film Candyman. Sometimes there's more truth to an urban legend than people believe. In this video, we're going to consider the crazy possibility that, for whatever reason, some of the original information from the urban legend, The Man From Taured, just might have been deliberately changed, and the story possibly a little bit more real than people think. And to do this, we'll first give a very brief recap of the story itself, The Man From Taured. Then we'll share the information about John Zegrus. That's the information that everyone uses to show that this story has been debunked and it's just an urban legend. But then we'll offer some new information about the questionability of the lead detective on the John Zegrus case and how he was involved in what many believe was the cover-up of, wait for it, the Kennedy assassination. Then we'll also throw in some dates that just don't seem to match up. Then stick around for our Fact or Fiction segment. There, I'll give you my opinion on this urban legend, and then Amy is going to come on, and she's going to share how some people believe that there just might be a very expensive machine at the core of this whole thing. So, this story begins, of course, in another universe. It was a warm day in July of 1954, and a man from the very well-established country of Taured hopped on a plane and he flew to Japan like he had done 1,000 times before. Well, he landed in the Tokyo airport, and as he was going through one of the checkpoints, an official behind the counter looked very closely at his passport and questioned his country of origin, saying that he had never heard of the country of Taured before. So the man was shown a map and he was asked to point to the country. Well, when he placed his finger on the map where the country should have been, instead of seeing Toured, he saw the Principality of Andorra. Well, the man became confused, but the official, well, he suspected foul play, and they detained the man. He was taken to a private room and he was searched, and it was discovered that he was in possession of several different European currencies, some of which were from countries that didn't exist. His passport was well used. It even showed stamps from previous visits to Tokyo. He said that he was there on business, and then he asked that they call his employer. Well, they did, but the employer said that they had never heard of this man. So, baffled, they put his passport and currencies and other documents in a locked box in a secure room at the airport. Then they took this man to a local hotel, where they placed him into a room with 2 guards outside until they could get to the bottom of this mystery. Well, I bet you remember what happened after that. The next morning, when they entered his room, they found it empty, and it appeared as if no one had even stayed there the night before. And the room was several floors up with no balcony, so it was highly unlikely that this man had escaped through the window. Well, they went back and retrieved his papers to see if maybe they could track him down that way. But strangely, all of his currencies and his passport and other documents had mysteriously vanished, and this man was never seen or heard from again. And in a nutshell, with various renditions depending on who is telling it, that is the tale of the man from Taured. It's a fantastic story, and Occam's razor alone says it probably isn't true. And with modern technology, one can easily get to the bottom of this, I think. A quick Google search will show that the urban legend all sprang from an arrest that was made in January of 1960. A man with a passport identifying him as John Allen Kutcher Zegrus was arrested for trying to cash a couple of bogus checks in 2 different banks in Tokyo using a counterfeit passport as identification. Upon his arrest, he claimed to be a diplomat representing the country of Nagusi-Hibasi. He said that he was CIA who had been born in the United States. He said that he had moved several times to different countries and he had become a fighter pilot for England during World War II, where he had been shot down, and then he spent the rest of the war in a German POW camp. After the war, he became an intelligence agent for the United States, working in Korea. Then he was a fighter pilot for Thailand, and finally he joined the Arab Coalition, where he became a citizen of Nagusi-Hibasi, which ordered him to go to Japan and recruit Japanese volunteers for the Arab Coalition. And now he was being falsely arrested while he was in the process of just doing his job. Well, he was sentenced to a year in prison, and then he was deported to Hong Kong. So, you may be asking yourself, how in the world did that story turn into the urban legend, the Man from Taured? It goes like this. This mystery man, John Zegrus, whose real name was never discovered, claimed to be from a non-existent country. Nagusi-Hibasi doesn't exist. With that being said, it's still not Taured. Here's how the powers that be would like you to connect the dots. About a month before Zegrus was sentenced, news reports about the case had already circulated the world, and a British member of Parliament, Robert Matthew, had made a speech in the House of Commons, arguing that passports were just not good enough to be used as identification, and he cited the case of Zegrus as an example. Only in his speech, he supposedly got a few things wrong. One of them was mistaking the non-existent country of Nagusi-Hibasi for the non-existent country of Taured, which the word Taured itself is supposedly a misspelling of the word Tuareg, referring to the Tuareg people who live in the Sahara Desert. The other mistakes in the speech are explained pretty much the same way, and if one combines the account of this counterfeiter, John Zegrus, with these mistakes that were uttered by Robert Matthew in the House of Commons, and then gives the story enough time and imagination, one easily gets the urban legend of the Man from Taured, I guess. And with a stretch, I suppose that I could buy all of that. But then there's all those pesky little anomalies of the lead investigator who was in charge of the John Zegrus case. In early 1960, a police officer in Tokyo named Atsyuki Sassa was put in charge of the John Zegrus case, and much of the information that the world has on the John Zegrus case today comes from this man's case notes and a book that he wrote in 2016 titled The Spies Who Passed Me By. This book is only available in Japanese, but in it, Sassa tells the complete story of this mysterious case of John Zegrus. Now, to be sure, there are other records of a man who was arrested in Tokyo for trying to pass bogus checks with a forged passport. But it wasn't at an airport, and it wasn't in July of 1954. It was in January of 1960, and this man in charge, Sassa, seems to have been connected with some very powerful people as he made an incredible career for himself, becoming the first Director General of the Cabinet Security Affairs Office in Japan. And he also showed up in places where it really seemed like he shouldn't have. For example, he was commissioned to work with the United States FBI in one of the most infamous cases of the century, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Supposedly, the Japanese government was worried that if a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, could assassinate a United States president, well, maybe your average Japanese citizen could also randomly assassinate a Japanese leader. So they sent Sassa to quietly work in the investigation and then report his findings back to the Japanese government, which he did.
The assassination of President Kennedy was an impulse act of one man, Lee Harvey Oswald. President Kennedy was hit by a steel-jacketed, high-powered bullet. It hit the back of the skull, pushing a skull fragment the size of a quarter through his brain.
Many people believe that the official investigation of the assassination of John F. Kennedy was just a ruse designed to cover the truth, and that truth being that it wasn't a lone gunman, but rather the world's most powerful people who killed Kennedy. And we can get into the reasons why later. Conspiracy theories range from him trying to take down the mob to his executive order 11110, which would have taken the U.S.'s money away from the Federal Reserve and given it back to the United States. I think it will be interesting to see what comes out of those recently released classified documents. In any case, it is extremely interesting that the man in charge of the John Zegrus case, a case that somehow exploded into an urban legend of a man from another universe, was also one of the investigators of a highly controversial investigation in another country halfway around the world. But it doesn't stop there. According to John Young of Cryptome, there's also, now check this out, photographic evidence that for some reason this man, Sassa, was in Dallas posing as a journalist the very day that Kennedy was assassinated. Supposedly, you can see him here with this group of men in the basement of the Dallas Police Department around midnight on November 22nd, 1963. That's Jack Ruby right there in the top right. Sassa's investigation into the Kennedy assassination is public knowledge. But how in the world did he get into that photograph? Kennedy was shot at approximately 12:30 p.m. local time Dallas, but the very first news of his death came at 1:33 p.m., which would have been 4:33 a.m. in Tokyo. And that time is important because that would have been the very first moment that the Japanese could have even considered the possibility that they wanted Sassa to investigate the president's death. And keep in mind that at this time in history, commercial flights from Tokyo to Dallas took somewhere between 15 to 20 hours. Even if we say that for some reason Sassa was already wide awake and prepared to leave at 4:30 in the morning, well, he'd still have to have gotten on a plane, got to Dallas, and then he would have had to have coordinated with the Secret Service and the local police. And he would have had to have done all of that in less than 10 hours and 27 minutes in order to have been in the basement of that police station and ready for that picture in the previous segment. So, if that is him in that picture, well, then he'd either had to have been much closer than Japan when Kennedy was shot, or something strange went on there. Either way, there seems to be plenty of evidence that Sassa was very strongly connected with the world's most powerful people, and therefore he was probably trusted with some very powerful secrets. So, did the urban legend, the Man From Taured, spring out of the John Zegrus case, or did this man, Sassa, use what happened with the John Zegrus case to hide a man from another world? What is a Japanese police officer doing so tightly connected to one of the biggest conspiracy theories of the last century? And is it just a coincidence that he was also the lead detective on a case that's supposedly the origins of one of the biggest urban legends of all time? It could make one speculate. What if the powers that be found some way to tap into a parallel world? And then what if, either by accident or on purpose, they rip someone from their universe and put them into ours? And then what if too many people found out about it? Well, how could something like that be covered up? I guess one way would be to use a patsy. You find a case that had similarities, you put someone in charge that you could trust who would conflate the two stories, and then you just give it enough time, tweak it here and there. Was Lee Harvey Oswald a lone gunman, or was he a patsy to cover up a conspiracy? Was John Zegrus the origins of the story The Man From Taured, or was he a patsy to cover up a conspiracy? Now, before you hang us out to dry and say that Rope has just lost its mind, let me give you my thoughts on this case. Amy and I, we ponder the paranormal. Our goal is to create a channel where people can come and speculate and wonder. My suspicion is that the Man from Taured is just an urban legend. But Atsyuki Sassa's involvement does make one think, especially if it really is him in that photograph, right? I bet it's not. Amy speculated, what if the powers that be really have found a way to tap into another universe? Is there a conspiracy theory out there that might spotlight a machine that's powerful enough to do that? And I'm wondering if you're going to be sharing about the machine that the Vatican has.
No, I'm not. Wow. But that makes me want to now go look into that one.
I'm lost.
Yeah, okay. Well, this one relates to the Mandela effect, which I think is really cool. You and I have talked about possibly doing a report on that in the future.
Yeah.
We've even had our viewers comment, like, do the Mandela effect. We will. People say, some conspiracy theorists say, that the Mandela effect was actually caused by CERN. So when CERN turned on their Large Hadron Collider, that's what caused the Mandela effect.
Right.
So the conspiracy goes that, and I believe it was 1952, 12 countries got together and created, we call it CERN. I think the acronym stood for the Council of Research of the Nuclear. Okay. Well, I believe it was 1954. CERN actually finished building their facility in Geneva. But it's no longer called CERN. I believe now it's the European Organization for the Research of the Nuclear. That doesn't spell CERN, but they kept CERN. Well, here's where the conspiracies really start to flourish. People believe that CERN was actually chosen and an acronym was built around it. And the reason they believe this is they say that CERN is short for the god Cernunnos. Cernunnos is an ancient horned god, supposedly related to bidirectionality, travel, the underworld, which sounds a lot like it's related to parallel universes to me. Some conspiracy theorists say that when CERN is doing what they're doing, smashing these particles together, they are creating rifts in the fabric of our reality and actually opening kind of gateways, if you want to say, to parallel universes. Okay. And so that they've created this machine related to the god Cernunnos that creates shifts in our reality. Some say it's on purpose, and one could actually get caught up in ending up in a parallel universe. Others say, no, it was kind of an accident, but people are having these parallel universe experiences because of what they're doing.
That's hard to believe, right? It's like all you're doing is smashing a subatomic particle together over here. Mm-hmm. How could that affect everything?
Well, they give a little bit of other evidence that there's something suspect going on there. Outside of the CERN facility is a statue of Shiva, right? Have you heard that?
Yes.
Right? Shiva, the god of destruction, right? And they say that points to a much more nefarious purpose to what they are doing. The conspiracy theorists say, we've got these hints to what they're really doing. Now, if you go to CERN's website, they say, we're doing this, and there's absolutely nothing harmful that would come out of this. And the theorists are saying, yeah, that's not true at all, right? Some say that the facility in Geneva was actually built over the Temple of Apollo, and that it is really a portal to other universes, that this location is that.
I love how much research you do. like you do research for my reports and you give it that all to me, and then somehow you find time to do this type of research too. This must have taken you a few hours.
Longer than a few hours, yeah. Yeah, it was, and I could have done so much more. I'm sure there are, other theories out there, like you mentioned the one about the Vatican. So I'll be looking into that in the future. Yeah.
Okay. So, like I always do, I have to ask you about this one.
All right.
So, what do you think? Do you think that the Man from Taured is just an urban legend, or do you think there's some truth to it?
Oh my gosh! Wow. So for this one, I think it is a case of what I call retrofitting. When you look at what Robert Matthews said, I'm sorry, I just have a real hard time buying that he messed up Ngozi Habasi. I mean, he is in Parliament, so he probably had access to documents that maybe none of us have right now. I don't think he screwed something up that bad.
Right.
That's where touted comes from.
Right.
I think we've retrofitted this Zegrus to fit something we still can't figure out, which is this touted anomaly.
So then your answer is you don't know.
I don't know.
So then let me just ask you more generally. First, do you think parallel universes do exist? And then do you think that travel between them is possible?
I think they could exist, and I think it is possible. I don't know. I don't have any evidence whatsoever, but I do think that it's a possibility.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again.
You're welcome.
Parallel universes. This and time travel are my two favorite types of reports. You no doubt have noticed that this video is quite a bit shorter than some of the other ones. Well, it's just Amy and myself right now, and we do everything from researching the information to meticulously editing each video. And along the way, we have to abide by a whole slew of things, one of them being YouTube's policies. That can get pretty intense. It literally takes us working 12 to 15 hours per day, 7 days per week to create these videos. When we gain enough subscribers, we're going to hire a team. And then watch out. But between now and then, every once in a while, we may have to produce a shorter video or take a week off here and there. This video, however, reminds me of the Peter Williamson case. Supposedly, a bolt of lightning somehow knocked a man into another universe. It's interesting because when this man returned, he brought an object back from the other universe. We did a complete report on this. It was, however, one of the reports that we produced when our channel was much younger, and you might find it a bit slow or a touch cringe in places. With that in mind, if you'd like to see it, it's here. We normally don't do conspiracy theories, so really want to know what you think. So leave us a comment if you liked it, if you want to see more, right?
Yeah.
You know what my conspiracy is?
What?
Love with you.
Oh.